Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Skelton. I'm with the First American Bible Project, and we're the keepers of an original First American Bible, which we brought back into print, as Brother David had said, so that we can put these Bibles back in schools. And I want to tell you that we have done that over 2,500 times. Amen. What I'm telling you is that these Bibles have gone into the hands of public school teachers that are teaching the American Revolution in elementary school, in middle school, and in high school because of the history. Please understand that the expectation is not that teachers will magically become preachers. That's not what's going on. It's because of the history that the Bible's going into the schools. And that history is this. So the American Revolution begins, and America stops trade with Britain. I tend to talk about the Bible in a strange, odd way to some ears. So yes, I've begun to talk about the Bible by saying America stopped trade with Britain. Everybody following along? So America stops trade with Britain. And among the many products that we stopped receiving from Britain were Bibles. Now, understand that's just a very natural consequence of going to war with someone. You stop purchasing their products. You stop sending money over to your enemy to fund the war effort against yourself, you see. So we stopped trade with Britain. Among the many products we stopped receiving were Bibles. And so the very first printer for the Journals of Congress was a man named Robert Aitken. Aitken is kind of a funny last name we don't use much anymore. It's spelled A-I-T as in Tom, K-E-N as in Nancy. It's pronounced like eight, like the number 8, and kin as in your next of kin. So Robert Aitken. Robert Aitken, I wanted you to know his name because he is a huge figure in Bible publishing in America for nobody to have any idea who he is. But listen to who he is. So he's a first-generation immigrant from Scotland who comes over to America and becomes a bookbinder. And in 1776, Congress is looking around and Congress is saying to itself, we have got to provide a book that is a record for what we're doing here so that future generations of Americans have any idea how we founded the country. And that's going to be called the Journals of Congress. It's going to be a record of everything that Congress is doing to found this rogue nation. And whoever we get to find that, if Britain wins because they are recording the founding of the nation in an official capacity, that person, well, they could swing at the end of the same rope that we're all going to swing at the end of. So who are we going to get? Who is going to volunteer to be the printer of the Journals of Congress? And Robert Aitken said, I will do it. And as history then records, Robert Aitken becomes the man that preserves the Declaration of Independence. I mean, by the very hand of Robert Aitken was the type set so that Thomas Jefferson's immortal words could be recorded in the Journals of Congress. Thank you very much, Mr. Aitken. That's in 1776. The very next year is 1777. Now, Brother David alluded to something that was going on, Bible printing in America, which is that Bible printing in America wasn't going on because King George had a license on the Bible. This sounds very strange to our ears today, but the fact of the matter was, it was illegal to print the Bible in America. At the founding of the nation, it was against the law to publish God's Word on American soil, as if we were communist China or Soviet Russia or something of that nature. A foreign power told us that we can't print God's Word, and we listened to them. That was the state of the nation. As a matter of fact, if anybody here has a King James version of the Bible that's published by an American publisher like Tyndale or Zondervan or Thomas Nelson or the Baptist Sunday School Board, if you have a King James version of the Bible published by an American publisher, this very Bible is the reason you have that Bible. Because this is the Bible that broke King George's rule that said you can't print the Bible in America. And the man that did it was Robert Aitken. But so he had a license, King George had a license on the Bible, and Robert Aitken discovered there's a loophole in the license. And the loophole was that The license only applied to the Old Testament and New Testament published together under one cover. But if you took the New Testament out and you published it under its own cover, and you took the Old Testament out and you published it under its own cover, the license no longer applied. So, in 1777, Robert Aitken gave America its first New Testament in English in America. So follow that. 1776, he preserves the founding document of America. 1777, he gives us another preservation of a founding document of America. I think you all follow with me there. That's a huge figure. And all of that was a warm-up to what he did next, was to print the only Bible approved by the United States Congress. So what happens there is that Robert Aitken writes a letter to Congress, and he says, I would like your approval to publish the first English Bible made in America. This book has so many remarkable claims to fame that we actually had to create a card that we give people as they get their picture taken with it, and then they leave so that they can keep all of it in mind. But Robert Aitken was essentially saying that it's going to be the first English Bible made in America. It's going to be the first King James Bible made in America. It's going to be the first English Bible made for schools. It's going to be printed only 6 years after the Declaration of Independence. It's going to be printed 5 years before the Constitution. And the one that gets everybody's wheels turning is, if it was published 5 years before the Constitution, well, Congress approved the printing of this Bible 9 years before the First Amendment. Somebody just said, wait a minute, the First Amendment, that's about the separation of church and state. Because we are constantly told that our founders believed in a separation of church and state. But somebody should have told the founders. Because how can they have believed in a separation of church and state if I have an original only Bible approved by Congress? I'll get into that in just a minute. So let me finish saying that Robert Aitken has written a letter to Congress to say, I want to publish the first Bible. It's going to have all of those accolades, all those remarkable titles to it. And to add one more title, it became the only Bible approved by Congress. And to add one more title, it then became the only Bible our government has ever recommended all American citizens read. And really, folks, this has all just been a long-winded way of saying that if this is the Bible that our government has told us to read, then finally, the government got one right. So that's the history of this book that we've got right here, an original. I'll say that this is fairly dramatic, but it needs to be said, that for some people, being in this room right now is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to stand 6 inches from history, because I could not put you any closer to an original founding document of America unless I flew you up to Washington, D.C., and we went to the National Archives Museum, and we stood in front of the actual Declaration of Independence on one side and Constitution on the other side. Because remember, this book here, this very one, was published only 6 years after the Declaration and 5 years before the Constitution. It is truly an original founding document of America. I want everybody, after we're done here tonight, to come up to have their picture taken with it so that you can tell your friends. You'll have a little card that certifies that you saw it, so that it's a real, true thing. So often we'll quote the Founding Fathers, and we should quote the Founding Fathers when it comes to matters of faith. However, I'm afraid that oftentimes the words go in one ear and out the other. But if you actually stand in front of the artifact itself, if you actually have your picture taken with the actual only Bible approved by Congress, then it does begin to chip away at something that I think is a great poison on our land today, which is to say this. I think that the greatest cultural stumbling block to the fulfillment of the Great Commission in American culture is the false doctrine of the separation of church and state. Because there's a word game at foot that was brought to my attention. I was talking to a friend one time about the separation of church and state, and he said, well, don't lose the word game, because they're playing a word game. Don't lose the word game. I thought, I didn't even know there was a game. I've probably been losing all these years. I said, what's the game? He said, well, they say one thing, they mean another. I said, what's that? And when he said this, It was a lightning bolt of an epiphany. Maybe it will be for you too. He said, they say separation of church and state. That's the very popular phrase, separation of church and state. What they mean is separation of faith and state. And the separation of faith and state is very different from a separation of church and state. If we were to say that our founders believed in a separation of church and state, which meant that the government as a financial institution or as an organization, as a business, should not be involved or commingling accounts or giving power to or enforcing the rules of the church corporately as an organization. That would be an accurate description of what our founders believed if they talked about a separation of church and state. That's what they believed. The key ingredient there is enforcement, which is to say they believed that if you went to the right church, you weren't going to get any kind of favoritism from the government. Neither if you went to the wrong church, you weren't going to receive a penalty. That's what it would mean if the government was enforcing a separation of church and state. That's what they were concerned about. Now, what's being said today, though, is essentially that people of faith that are in positions of influence, especially in the public sector, should not be bringing their faith to bear as they make decisions. What they're scared of is that people of faith will use the Judeo-Christian ethic that they've derived to make decisions that they consider to be morally correct decisions. Now, I will say that they have good reason to fear that, if they're going to fear that, because if I rip an example from the headline, what happens when Christians bring their faith to bear in the public sector in the course of their jobs is we overturn Roe v. Wade. That sounds like a dramatic thing to say, right? Well, a little civics quiz here. Does anybody happen to know how many court cases petition the court, not the ones that are heard, only how many court cases petition the court, the Supreme Court, each year to be heard? Does anybody know how many? How many attorneys raise their hand and they say, I have got a dire constitutional issue. It affects the majority of Americans. It's extremely important. Justices, you've got to hear me. You've got to hear my case. Does anybody know how many petition the court to be heard? It's about 10,000. About 10,000 each year petition the court to be heard. Now, does anybody know how many they hear? About 170. About 170. Does anybody know how you get from 10,000 court cases down to 170? It's essentially what interests the judges. They don't have some type of algorithm that they're running that says, we got to hear a case on the Fourth Amendment. And it's been a while since we addressed the 10th Amendment. We got to hear something there. And oh, by the way, this year is the year we're supposed to hear something on the Third Amendment. They don't do that. Rather what happens is the justices and their staff will look across the range and they'll say something like, Dobbs v. Jackson has the potential to overturn Roe v. Wade. Justice Kavanaugh, are you interested? He says, yes, I am interested in that. So from 10,000, we go down to about 170. This is probably the only time I'll ever recommend this next resource as something you should read, but the New York Times did an excellent chronicling of how Dobbs v. Jackson actually came to overturn Roe v. Wade. And where it all starts is a man of faith. Where it all starts with is Justice Samuel Alito. So Justice Alito, from as far back as anyone can remember, was pro-life. And he openly expressed that. Justice Kavanaugh was not that far behind. Justice Coney Barrett was also not that far behind. So, and Neil Gorsuch, the rest of those guys were Catholics. To talk about that Catholics on the court would include Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett and Clarence Thomas, Sam Alito. At any rate, Neil Gorsuch is a Protestant. So anyway, that's where I got hung up, was thinking that Neil Gorsuch, he is a Protestant. So those justices kind of marshaled together, and against the protests of the liberal judges who did not want to hear it because they feared it would overturn Roe v. Wade, those justices marshaled together and they continued to shepherd it through until finally the outcome was. I don't mean to take anything away from the constitutional concerns that Dobbs v. Jackson did raise. I'm not saying that. However, I will circle back around and say, I dare say that the majority of those 10,000 cases that petitioned the court that year, they all had constitutional issues. They all could have been heard for their constitutional issues, the same as Dobbs v. Jackson. But Dobbs v. Jackson was of particular interest because those justices, having expressed their opposition to abortion on moral grounds, were inclined to be interested in a case that could potentially right a wrong that had been going on in our country. So I say that the other side of the fence says separation of church and state. They mean separation of faith and state. If anybody happen to have seen the Washington Post headline after the ruling on Dobbs v. Jackson that overturned Roe v. Wade, they said the Supreme Court should not legislate morality. To their credit, they correctly saw what happened. They correctly saw that people of faith had brought their faith to bear in making their decisions, and the end result of that was the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the saving of countless, or at least I'd say still, the saving of countless unborn innocent lives. Because in reverting it back to a states' rights issue, they had to have known that about half the states, weren't as freely inclined as the federal government was to say we should provide abortion on demand. So at any rate, I do think that they saved the lives of countless unborn innocents. So I guess one thing that I'd say to you is the next time someone starts talking about a separation of church and state, and I don't go a day without hearing that. Somebody saying, oh, there's a separation of church and state. Ask them what they mean by that, and before you've scratched very deep on the surface, you'll actually get to what they're saying is they don't want Christians bringing their faith to bear on making decisions, especially if it affects the rest of us. They don't want that, I think that if the government was to level the playing field, what they would say is that the government should be recommending, not enforcing, but recommending all the good stuff that comes from all the faiths. So if they really level the playing field, they'd say, yeah, all the good stuff from the Christian religion, absolutely. All the good stuff from the Jewish religion, absolutely. All the good stuff from the Buddhist religion, absolutely. All the good stuff from the Muslim religion, absolutely. The one thing the state should be mindful of is they should only be supporting those religions that do, in fact, support the Constitution. Because remember, it's the state we're talking about, and the state's beholden to the Constitution. If the state loses the Constitution, then it doesn't have a reason to exist. It undermines its own foundation. So as long as we say that the Christian religion supports the Constitution, which it does, or the Jewish religion supports the Constitution, which it does, I'm not an expert on Buddhism or Hinduism. Somebody has offered a caution to me just recently on the Islamic religion and whether that actually supports the Constitution or not. But I will say that there's a guideline for you that in the conversations you have with people, when you talk about the difference between a separation of church and state and a separation of faith and state, and the fact that our founders believed you shouldn't be enforcing religion on anybody, but recommending religion was fine. How in the world can you say that? Ta-da! Because you've gotten a picture with it. You know that there was a Bible that was approved by Congress and recommended by the American government to be read by all American citizens. Not they would suffer any penalty if they didn't do that, but that the government was recommending that because of all the good things that come from this book. Until a year ago, I'll bet you $1 to a donut, if someone had stopped you on the street and said, can a public school teacher pray on the football field in front of God and everybody? Can a public school teacher pray like that? You would have said, no, public school teacher? No, a public school employee cannot pray on the 50-yard line of a football field. And you would have said, really, why not? And, well, separation of church and state, you see. That means that a public employee can't openly show their faith, and that's considered the government endorsing religion. Now, I know the courts have, to a certain extent, supported that interpretation. At least they have years. But as you guys know, I'm actually referencing the Supreme Court case, Kennedy v. Bremerton, where Coach Joseph Kennedy did pray on the 50-yard line of his football field in Bremerton, Washington. And if you can imagine, he then lost his job over a figment of the school board's imagination. You know, and I also caution you this, because there's not actually any constitutional basis for a separation of church and state. That doesn't appear anywhere in the Constitution. What's really being highlighted here is a topic they disagree with. They disagree with the fact that the coach would pray. They disagree with the fact that he would express his faith. But listen, if we're just going to play with topics, then any topic could fill in the blank. That's what Justice Kavanaugh was getting at in the Kennedy v. Bremerton case. I don't know if you guys read any of the transcripts, and you guys are like, no, Steve, because we're not a nerd like you. Justice Kavanaugh, actually said, so the coach lost his job because he was standing on the football field and he expressed his faith. Okay. He said, so would the coach have lost his job? I understand the topic was faith. Would the coach have lost his job if the topic was the war in Ukraine? If the coach got out there and said, it's war in Ukraine, you guys would have fired him, right? Because, he shouldn't be expressing his political opinions there. Oh, no? Okay. Well, if the coach got on the football field and he expressed his opinion on climate change, you guys would have fired him, right? Right? I mean, that's just as constitutional, right? I mean, it's a topic that you don't agree with. And so you would have fired him there. And they're like, well, no, it was just the faith. Just faith is the only topic that we would have fired him over. Wow. Really? And again, that's all. It's like if somebody said to you, hey, we heard you talking about sports, and we don't like the team that you were in support of, so you're fired. That's what happened to Coach Kavanaugh, and it took him 7 years to get before the court for the court to say, think again. And he was free to pray on the 50-yard line, especially because it was in his own time. He wasn't actually on the clock as the coach right there. He was in a little break time there when he went and did that. And so they gave the coach back his job, and the school board had to shell out a whole bunch of money, or at least their insurance company did. But thank goodness, because that's a step in the right direction. It's a great correction that we're seeing right now. When Robert Aitken wrote the letter to Congress, he suggested one place that the Bible should be used. And when I ask folks to guess the one place he named, some folks will say, well, he must have said churches. He didn't say churches. Other people will say, well, homes. He must have said homes because homes are an important place for Bibles, but that's not the one place he named to Congress that we should print this Bible for. Hospitals? No, he didn't say hospitals. Robert Aitken only said one place that Congress should approve the printing of this Bible, and it was schools. So, and this part gives me chill bumps. I don't know how I could connect you folks with the founding of our country in any more of a profound way than to point this out. So the intention first spoken to our founding fathers in 1781. In 1781, the intention first spoken to our founding fathers that this Bible would be published for the use in schools, that intention is being fulfilled by us in our time. And that's not just historical, that's providential. That's the well that Robert Aitken dug back in 1781 and the fulfillment of that we're providing today. I've taken up way too much time. So I will be up here after we convene. If anybody has any questions or comments, please come up and let's talk. If anybody wants to put the Bible back in schools, Let's talk about that as well, how you can support the First American Bible Project. And please, please don't leave before you actually get your picture taken with this so that you can be the first on your block and tell all your friends about it. Thanks so much for your time and attention. God bless you.